Hello students! Today we'll talk about a pretty important topic in my classes, APA style formatting. So this applies to all my different classes. I'm recording this in the class that is doing a literature review. I have a couple other classes that do a literature review. Some do a smaller essay I call a question paper, or other similar essays that I have do in APA formatting. Some of my classes I also have do a full research paper. So this will all apply to those. So I'm going to talk about APA style from the sense of doing a literature review paper, but it applies in all APA style formatting for papers. So let's get started. APA is a commonly used citation and paper formatting method in social sciences. Other sciences use it as well, so psychology, linguistics, sociology use it, but other sciences do also. You might have also heard of like MLA. I think it's ELA or something like that you might see English writing, so like a paper in an English class, you might have written it in, say, MLA format. It's kind of a similar type of thing. It's a format made by the American Psychology Association to try and keep scientific writing in a kind of uniform way. So papers are set out a specific way, so it's easier for people to understand what's within a paper. Citations are done in a uniform way, in a way that I think really helps to keep the reader reading, but also citing the material. So in some formats, in some kind of citation formats, you'll have an asterisk or a number or something like that at the end of a sentence, like a superscript, like a little tiny number, and then look down at the footnotes or something for the full reference. APA style is generally in parentheses, so the author's names and a year in parentheses. And I'm used to that now. I've been doing it for years, but I find it makes it pretty easy to read through and get a sense of, oh, that's the researchers who have done this. You might see that come up again, rather than you might not recognize like a number 5 multiple times throughout a paper. Or you might. I don't know. I wasn't trained on that for as long, just in like undergrad English classes. So APA format really helps scientific writing be pretty uniform, that no matter what journal you're picking up, it's going to be pretty similarly structured. So with this, it's also a good way to give credit to the resources you're gathering your information from. And so that's a big thing with citations, is in any research paper, we're standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us. So we're talking about their ideas, and now we have this new way to test it, or this new idea to build off of that. And so we're citing that older research. So unless you did your own original research in one of my classes, essentially almost everything in your paper is going to have citations. So almost every sentence. So you might look at it and be like, oh my goodness, there's so many little parentheses with authors and years all throughout my paper. And that's really how it should look for an undergraduate paper, because most of these ideas you're having, you might be putting them together in a novel way, or describing a lot of previous research that maybe is new to you, but these are previous researchers who have written about this before, so you've got to give them credit. Where did your ideas come from, kind of thing. So unless you did original research, like collected your own data, almost everything that is in your paper will be cited. You have to cite anything you didn't come up with independently. So pretty much everything in an undergrad paper is going to be like that. Unless you're doing one of my classes that does a full research paper, then like your results are obviously your own results, your data is your own data, that kind of thing. So in-text citations and reference lists are big. So what is APA? So it starts with the heading levels it starts with an abstract, but we'll go through the different sections of the paper. But one of the big things is headings. Heading levels and the headings themselves help a reader follow your ideas. So you might have a whole section on heroism, or a whole section on pro-social behavior, a whole section on mindfulness, and you might have subsections under that. The headings help a reader keep track of, oh, this is all within the section on mindfulness, and your next section is on stress, in the biology of stress, or something like that. So that is what heading levels do. They help a reader follow the main ideas and keep track of those throughout the paper. It's also a standardized formatting that makes it a little less confusing when you pick up a paper from different journals. It's got pretty standardized heading levels. Any given journal, we'll talk about like first and second level headings in a minute. Any given journal might only use first level headings or something as a style choice, but usually they follow APA formatting pretty well. APA also makes it pretty easy for researchers to locate sources. So as I read this sentence, I say, oh, this idea came from this paper from these researchers and this paper from these other researchers. So it helps me go to the references, look those papers up really quickly. I think it's a little easier and quicker, but again, I'm maybe biased in that way because this is what I've been trained on. So some general formatting rules for APA formatting. So your papers, whether it's a question paper, whether it's a lit review, whether it's a whole research paper or one of my other paper assignments, need to be typed in a double space format. I personally prefer a 1.5 spacing, but APA formatting is double spaced. So that's what we use, is double spacing. And when we're not printing out the paper anyway, it's not like it's wasting paper. Have a 1-inch margin on all sides. It should be 12 point. It doesn't have to be Times New Roman, but it should be a serif font. There's a couple ones that are accepted by the APA. It used to be only Times New Roman, and that's a pretty safe default to go to. But there are a couple other fonts font styles that are acceptable to APA now. But Times New Roman, good bet. All of the font styles are a serif font, so they have the little tails on the letters. These letters in my slides do not have little tails. Also on Zoom, these do not have little tails either. But a serif font has little tails. With that, you only have one space between paragraphs. So your paragraph, then you just click enter and a new paragraph starts. There's not an extra big space there. Since you're doing double space already, that's enough space between paragraphs. So that's what I mean by one double space. So you get to the end of a paragraph, you press enter, you start on your new paragraph. Other things, be consistent about your point of view and your voice. And so what I mean by that is you can use first person, you could use third person. There's no rule for first or third person in APA at this point. In the past there has been, but right now you can write in first person, you can write in third person. Just be consistent about it throughout your paper. For my classes, unless I've told you otherwise in class or in an email or something like that, I don't mind if it's first or third person. Some things I'm writing, I tend to write in first person. Some things I'm writing, I tend to write in third person. So APA recommends first person and active voice, but it isn't a hard and fast rule. There are times third person can make it a little more confusing or a little more wordy, and a lot of APA's new rules in version 7 or edit 7, APA 7 basically focus on being concise, consistent, to the point, not very wordy. So first person and active voice can really help with that. So I'll give some examples of that in a minute. And this is what APA says on it. It helps avoid ambiguity and attribution. So who did what makes a lot more sense. So when you describe your work as part of your own research and when expressing your own views, it's a lot more clear when you're using first person and active voice. So I definitely recommend doing that, using first person active voice, but it's not a rule for my classes. If you're writing in third person and passive voice, that's okay, but try first person active voice. It's how a lot of science has been written for the last 10 years or so, a little more. So some journals, this is a strange thing. Some individual journals don't allow first person still. That has been changing. I haven't actually seen that rule for a couple of years now. So I think it's probably since the APA updated it. Maybe the journals I saw it from have updated that now. But there were in the past journals that didn't allow first person. So you'd have to write for that journal in third person. So one of the reasons APA made this change is because there was a lot of overuse of passive voice, and that can make things confusing. It essentially you read through the whole sentence before you find out what's happening, versus with active voice you kind of find out the subjects of the sentence in the beginning and then go through the sentence. So a lot of writers overused passive voice in the past, so use active voice as much as possible to create direct, clear, and concise sentences. And that's a real focus of APA, is writing clearly, concisely, getting to the point of your sentences, of your sections of your paper, being as concise and clear as you can. So passive can be really good for expository writing, focusing on the object itself rather than the action that's happening to it. So depending on what you're trying to do, passive voice might be better, might help you focus on that object rather than the subject. So here's a couple examples. First person active voice. I will describe the research on heroism. Or this would be, if you're with a team, we examined the literature on mindfulness. So we did something. Pretty clear. And third person passive voice would be, the research on mindfulness will be described. So what are you doing? You're describing. What are you describing? The research on mindfulness. So it tends to be a little more wordy depending on what you're talking about. If you're overusing this third person passive voice, it can be a little more confusing at times. So I recommend first person active, but if you're using third person passive, just be consistent through your paper. Don't switch back and forth and back and forth. All right, so verb tense. So be consistent about verb tenses in every section of the paper, like abstract, introduction, methods, results, discussion. Be consistent about your verb tense in that section of the paper. And I've got some rules or some guidelines really on what kind of tense you should be using in each given section of the paper. But just try to make sure within that section, stick with the same tense. If you're switching tenses to past tense, present tense, to future tense, it can be really confusing to the reader as they're reading through and trying to understand what's happening. So here are the recommendations. The literature review is for most of, like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm recording this for a class that's doing a literature review. So your entire paper is lit review. So with that, you can use past tense in your entire paper, or you can use present perfect tense in your entire paper. And feel free to look those up to get a better idea of what past versus present perfect are. If you're in one of my classes that does an entire research paper, you can write most of the paper in past tense or present perfect for lit review and method. And then for reporting of results, the results that you're talking about happened in the past. You did your study, even if it was just yesterday, that's the past, right? So that's always past tense. Discussion of the implications of the results. So your results section, then you move to your discussion section. That discussion section should be in present tense. So you might have an advisor that advises something different, but APA recommends, see, these are recommendations, not necessarily hard and fast rules, but they advise using present tense for the discussion and the conclusion and the implications, those kinds of things. So here are some examples of these. So previous researchers found that, or previous researchers looked at heroism by interviewing people in the methods. Participants completed a survey measuring mindfulness and heroism. Reporting of results. We found a strong positive correlation between heroism and mindfulness. Discussions of the implications. These results suggest that heroism and mindfulness are the same thing. They don't, I'm just making up a discussion implication. A limitation of the study is that I didn't actually do this study. So just as an example, I've never done, I actually did do one study that I had mindfulness questions in and heroism questions in when I was first testing heroism questions. I don't remember if I ever tried to look at correlations. It was too early of a draft of the measure anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. All right, so again, these are the recommendations from APA, what kind of verb tense to use in each section of your paper. So try to stick with this. Again, if you're using present perfect in your lit review, I probably use present perfect in the method. If you're using passive tense in your lit review, probably use past tense in your method section. For most of my classes, what you're doing fits within literature review. So use past or present perfect. All right, page headers. These are what we would call headers. This is a title page with the title there, and actually I've got title pages first. I have the wrong title on my page about title pages. Sorry about that. So title pages actually, and then we'll talk about headers next. So this is an example of a professional research paper's title page. So this looks really similar to what my dissertation looks like. That's front page of it. For undergrad student papers, APA has changed one little thing. So this is a little game of what's different between these two things. You don't have a running head on the student paper. So your paper should look like this. So that goes for all my classes, doing a lit review, doing a research paper, unless you're in an advanced class, which I've probably recorded something new for that advanced class. So for all the classes that should be seeing this video, this is what your title page should look like. And this is an example of the formatting for your abstract page. You have a first level heading that says abstract in bold, and then the paragraph is all left aligned, so there's no indent here for the abstract. And then include keywords to mention, like, these are kind of the main topics. So based on my example, I'd put heroism, mindfulness, pro-social behavior. Those would be some of my keywords. So this is essentially what your page 1 and page 2 should look like in your paper. If you're doing a question paper, you're not actually doing an abstract, and in some of my classes I don't require a title page on question papers. But for a lit review, absolutely page 1, page 2. Not like this. All right, so page headers for the running head is the title shortened at the top left of the page. So again, APA Volume 7 says don't do that on student papers on the title page. You will have a running head after the title page though. So page 2 and 3, there should be a running head at the top. Actually, no, let me just double check that. Yeah, your paper should have a running head on the rest of the pages, but not the title page. So for researchers, so for something that you're submitting to a journal, a researcher's paper will have a running head. So numbers are always right aligned. That means up here in the top right corner. So do keep track of what maybe a journal wants as well. You might find a journal that says don't include page numbers or something like that, but generally journals want you just to submit in APA format. All right, so page number is right aligned, centered, and double spaced for the title itself. And then over here, make sure you're including the title of your paper for your lit review. So this goes for all my students. Your title of your paper, whatever you've decided the title is. Don't forget to put your name. Make sure that's there. Your affiliation, so your school or the company that you're at where you're writing this paper. The course name is a really good thing to put there, or is a required thing to put there. My own, or the instructor's name, since you might be doing this for another class or reviewing this paper. So put the instructor's name and then the assignment's due date. So those are the things APA says for students to put on their title page. So you got the page number, the title, your name, your affiliation, the course name, professor's name, and due date. All right, then, so that's your first page. Now, your second page is your abstract. On your abstract, you have a brand new page. You can just press enter till you get to a new page, or do a page break, keeps formatting nicer. So do a page break and do the top center with the word abstract. Then for the actual abstract, the content, it should be between about 150 to 250 words. If you go a little over that, that's fine. If you're under 150, you're probably not summarizing enough of your paper. So basically, this is a short summary of the entire paper. So one thing I like to tell my students who are doing a whole research paper is try to put about 2 sentences per section of your paper. So 2 sentences on the intro, 2 sentences on the methods, 2 sentences on the results, 2 sentences on the discussion, and then from that draft, build out more detail in the sections you think need more detail. Focusing on the discussion is a really good idea generally. For those of you doing a lit review, you'll want to summarize all the main points. So all the main points, all the main arguments, you should be able to see them in the abstract. So again, it should be about 150 to 200 words. And this is really helpful because when abstracts are structured this way, when it summarizes the whole paper, it lets people know as they're searching through for articles if they should read your whole paper. So as you're doing lit reviews and trying to find journal articles for what you want to research, you read the title, you say, oh yeah, this plus the keywords, this looks like an article I might want to read. Then you go and you read the abstract and you see, oh yeah, this is perfect. This is exactly what I need. And that can save a lot of time, and then you save that and then you come back and read it later on. All right, so this is what your abstract should look like. Again, you should have a running head there, and you should have the page number in the top right. Abstract is bold, and obviously this is either Latin or just gibberish. Just to give an example from, I think this came from Purdue's OWL, their online writing lab. So it stays left aligned, and you should include some keywords. So that is the abstract. Now the introduction. The introduction is essentially it presents the topic, what you're going to be discussing, the introduction of a whole paper, say a research paper tends to be a few pages long, but there's also an introduction paragraph in that introduction. So after the abstract, basically the first content page of your paper starts with the introduction and starts with a paragraph introducing the whole paper. So you're giving an overview of the research paper, why you're doing the research, what the previous literature said. So literature reviews themselves, the lit review is the introduction. So an entire lit review paper talks about different concepts in the field. So let's say you're talking about mindfulness. You might want to talk about previous meditation or meditation exercises that have been tested. That might be one of your sections. You might want to talk about the biology of stress. And then you might want to put them together in a third section, the biology of stress in relation to doing those mindfulness exercises. So essentially you've got 3 different key pieces there, but you're talking about previous people's work. You're not doing your own study on a mindfulness exercise. You're reporting on this previous research. So essentially that's what an entire lit review is. It's a really long introduction to this topic. In the end, you might recommend a study be done, or you might say have some other kind of point that you're trying to argue. Generally, you're in a lit review in a research paper, you're saying this is what's been done up to this point. Now this is what we need to do is kind of the end of your literature review introduction. So literature reviews in a research paper have lots of headings, talk about the previous research that's been done in the area, and talk about this is what we need to do now, or this is what this study is going to do. For your lit reviews in the class, it's basically that same thing. It's multiple pages or sections talking about the work that previous people have done, you putting it together in a new way, you introducing the topics in a specific way, and calling attention of the reader to specific things in the field, and then saying, now the field needs to do this. So in your lit review paper, you won't actually go and do that study, but you will talk about what previous researchers have done. So with this, you will still have a first paragraph that does introduce the topic of the paper, like this is what this paper is about. You could literally say, the purpose of this paper is to review literature on mindfulness. You could literally say that, but have a first paragraph on that first content page, which would be basically page 3, because you've got title page, abstract page, then the first introduction page, introducing what you're going to be discussing. So here's an example of the formatting that you should have on your third page of your paper. I know this says number 2. This is basically page 3, because you've got a title page, you've got an abstract, and then here is the beginning of your lit review. So you've got your title written there in bold in the center, and then you jump into the content. This would be your first paragraph introducing the topic, and it is indented. Each of these paragraphs do have an indent. You can see here there are in-text citations with researchers' names and the years. Some of these are highlighted from the screenshot I took of this. So this is an example of what your third page of your paper in a lit review should look like. So, and then you jump into headings and sections connected to your topic. So you might have that one first paragraph introducing a topic, and then you might have a first level heading or a second level heading introducing you to mindfulness or biology and stress or something like that. So with this, you might have a whole page introducing the whole topic, but probably not more than that before you jump into new headings. So this is an example of maybe on page 3 or page 4, you have a first and second level headings. So here we've got, maybe this is your section on mindfulness, and specifically you have a specific mindfulness program. So loving kindness meditation. No, loving kindness meditation is different than mindfulness. Let's say meditation styles. Loving kindness meditation. Down here you have another second level heading. That's mindfulness meditation. So that's an example of a first and second level heading, and then this is talking about this specific topic, and this specific topic is under the umbrella of this specific topic. So this heading will, any heading level change generally starts a new topic, like you're changing gears to focus on something else. Like before you were talking about the biology of stress, and now you're talking about mindfulness exercises. You have a heading level to really delineate that there's been a change here. So you might, in a paper on pro-social behavior, you have a heading on pro-social behavior, and then another first level heading on volunteering, or maybe pro-social behavior and then a section on volunteering, and then another first level heading on another thing related to pro-social behavior. So these are some examples. This is what your page 3 or page 4 should look like. This is definitely what page 3 should look like at the beginning here. And then right about here, you might start with a first level heading or even a second level heading right here and jump to one of those topics to focus on. So this paper will describe research on mindfulness and stress in biology. Obviously, it needs to be a full paragraph, better written than that. And then here you might say meditation exercises as a first level heading, a second level heading of mindfulness meditation, another second level heading after a paragraph of loving kindness meditation. And then down here, the next page, another first level heading of the biology of stress. And then here you could have neurology of stress and the hormones related to stress, and another second level heading. So hopefully these examples are not too confusing. Hopefully they help you see how you use and organize the paper a little bit. So heading levels really depend on how complex and how long your paper is. So for our example of we're talking about biology of stress and mindfulness, we might only need 2 first level headings. We need one on maybe mindfulness exercises. We need another first level heading on biology of stress. And our paper is kind of split up into those 2 things, and maybe a third first level heading for conclusion. That might be all you need in your whole paper. But if you are talking about mindfulness and then talking about every single different kind of mindfulness exercise, you might have more second level headings under those first level headings. So if only 1 level of heading is needed, use level 1. If 2 heading levels are needed, use levels 1 and 2. Think of it kind of like an outline with bullet points. So 1 bullet point would be just heading level 1, and all the topics are under that 1 bullet point. If you've got a second indented bullet point under that first one, that's a second level heading. And if you have more headings or more bullet points underneath that, that's third level headings. Probably for my students in doing a lit review, I probably won't be seeing anything beyond second level headings, but it is possible. So with this, here is an example of how to write first level headings, second level headings, third level, fourth level, fifth level. So first level headings, centered, bold, title case. Level 2 headings to the left, bold, and then the text begins as a new paragraph. For level 3, you're bold and italic. The text also begins as a new paragraph. For fourth level heading, it changes where you're bold and indented, and it's basically a piece of that paragraph itself. So like I said, I'll probably only see these 2 heading levels for students in my classes doing literature reviews, but if you go beyond that, that is okay. So this is an example of first level heading, second level heading. So this might be mindfulness exercises or meditation exercises, and then this heading is mindfulness, and then another another second level heading down here that says loving kindness meditation. All right, so in text citations, one of the big things is making sure your work is calling back to the people that you got those ideas from and not plagiarizing. So you must cite direct quotes. That's probably not too surprising. You also must cite paraphrasing. And so paraphrasing is essentially when you put the work that you've read into your own words, because those original ideas, they came from those previous researchers. And so you've got to give credit to those previous researchers. So with direct quotes, you should also include the page number in your document. So you have the author's name, the year, and the page number where you got that direct quote from the article. For paraphrasing, you also have the author's name and the year. So with that, let's say I read a paper that's describing this specific mindfulness exercise. So let's call it, I'm looking at a little aloe vera plant, so I'm literally making up a name. So this is aloe vera mindfulness. Really terrible name. It doesn't really roll off the tongue. But let's say I'm talking about that. I learned about it from these 2 papers, and I'm putting it on my own words. It's not direct quotes from those papers. I'm putting in ideas from these other 2 papers that I read, but I'm describing it in my own words. I still need to have in-text citations for those paraphrases, Because yes, I'm putting it in my own words, but these ideas, I wouldn't have known about aloe vera mindfulness unless I had read those papers. So this is where I got, that was the source of my information, was those two papers. And I'll show you some examples of citations in a second. So make sure you include the year the article was published, the author's names, and depending on how many authors, you might only need to do a few of the authors' names in the in-text, but in the reference list, you include all the authors. So if you use the same article twice in one paragraph, you can exclude the year the next time you include it, but I just say, because students tend to make more mistakes that way, just include the year every time. It's not incorrect. It does just take a couple more spaces, the 4-letter or 4-number date, but that's fine, I think. So this is what it might look like when you are citing a paraphrase. So I learned this about aloe vera mindfulness from the author Silver, and their paper was written in 2010. So this is how you would cite or paraphrase one author paper. So Silver talked about aloe vera mindfulness. He published a paper on it in 2010. I learned about that and I paraphrased it into my own paper. I talked about aloe vera mindfulness. I'm not using direct quotes from Silver, but I'm talking about what I learned from Silver about aloe vera mindfulness in my paper. This is how my sentence ends as I describe it. If there's two authors, so if two people wrote the paper, this is what you would see as the in-text citation. So I read the second paper that I read. The first one was by Silver, and that was on aloe vera mindfulness. Riches and Cohen did another paper on aloe vera mindfulness. They wrote theirs in 2020. So with this, there's two authors to that paper, Riches and Cohen. So I am going to include both of their names in my in-text citation. So one author, it's like this. Two authors, it's like this. And then if you have more than two authors, APA Volume 7 says do it like this. So Dombrowski et al. This means and others, essentially. It's Latin. And then the year. So Dombrowski and other authors wrote this page. So 3 authors, 4 authors, 5 authors, 20 authors, anything more than 2 authors now. This is how you cite it the first time and every time in the paper when you're paraphrasing. So I found out about aloe vera mindfulness from 3 papers. One paper had 1 author. So at the end of the sentence, I will, after I describe their research, I'll include Silver 2010. For Riches and Cohen, I'll describe their research, put Riches and Cohen 2022. And then for this paper that had 20 authors, I'll put Dombrowski et al. 2007 at the end of my sentence. So you might see in some of the papers you read something like this: Dombrowski, Gichler, and Durst, 2007. So that's 3 authors there. You might see that in some of the papers that you're reading. Up until about 2020, that is how we used to do it. Anything over, it was about to like 5 authors. The first time you would put all the authors' names, and then every other time you would say Dombrowski et al. Now we just start with Dombrowski et al. It makes it just a little bit shorter. Some people don't like this because if you're on a 3-author paper, in the past, your name would be on there. If you were the 3rd author, your name would be in that paper at least the first time. Now, if you're the 2nd or 3rd author, you're not on that paper unless they look at the reference list. So some people are upset about it, but I do think it really helps make the space for references shorter, but it's still clear enough that a reader can say, oh, I'm looking for Dombrowski et al. 2007. Let's look in the reference list. Oh, it's Dombrowski, Gichler, Durst, 2007. So I really like this change, even though there are some cases where the previous, I was a 3rd author or a 2nd author, that now is under this et al., which is not a big deal. Still on my CV, right? So use this one now. You might see this one in things before 2020, even some things into like 2021. I've seen some journals just be a little slow to adopt this, but make sure you're using this. All right. Oh, also, make sure if you are paraphrasing research from multiple authors. So let's say both Dombrowski and Riches and Cohen both tested the same kind of aloe vera mindfulness in 2 separate studies. So I'm talking about the results of both those studies together in my paper. So I'm paraphrasing their research, paraphrasing their findings, talking about them both together in one sentence. At the end of that sentence, I include both sets of authors separately. So Dombrowski et al., 2007, semicolon, I always forget if this is a semicolon or a colon. I'm pretty sure it's semicolon, then the Riches and Cohen right here. So both of them gave me the ideas for this specific sentence, even though I'm not directly quoting them. So make sure when you do this, it's alphabetical. So if there was someone with an A as their last name, that would be first, obviously, that kind of thing. There have been cases where in my lit review, I'm describing a really well-known, really well-researched kind of topic, let's say bystander effect. Lots of people have written on bystander effect, so even just a simple comment about bystander effect that came from multiple papers, I might be citing like 4 or 5 studies with just that one sentence, and that can happen. So just make sure they're in alphabetical order. So again, one author, so a single author, single paper, 2 authors, 1 paper, more than 2 authors, 1 paper. This is how you cite it in text. And then when you are citing more than 1 paper, you do it this way for any given sentence. So when you cite a short quote, so something really short, let's say a sentence or so, you're most likely going to be using past tense because it was written in the past, otherwise you probably wouldn't have it. If you're not the doctor, you probably can't get a quote from someone in the future and bring it back. So this is how you might cite that. DeLong, Durkin, and Hundersmark, or you could say DeLong and colleagues in 2010 stated, quote, so quotation mark, the offenders, I'm not going to actually read this whole thing, but this is the quote. It's a sentence, close parenthesis, or close quotation marks, space, comma here, or I'm really messing up my punctuation right now. All right, so you introduce it. DeLong, Durkin, and Hundersmark in 2010. So there I have the author's names, I have the year stated, and this is literally what they stated. This is their quote. I have quotation marks, I have the quote in here, close the quotation marks, space, parentheses, page number, P.63. Technically, if it goes over 2 pages, like if it's on page 63 and 64, I think you do PP, but that will probably not happen to you. So yeah, PP is for multiple pages, and the period always goes after the parentheses. I have that here because I often forget that. I forget, do I put the period here? Do I put it here? Do I put it here? It always goes after the parentheses. So let's say you didn't introduce them. I think I have, yeah. So let's say I just have the quote. I start my sentence with the quote, the offenders, blah, 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 blah. I close the parentheses, or I close the quotation, and then here, it's kind of like this, right? I would put DeLong et al, comma, 2010, space, P.63, close parentheses, period. But you might be doing short quotes. You probably won't be using long quotes. I definitely don't recommend my students using long quotes. I want to see more of your ideas, how you've put together the past research, not a half page of a quote. Even if it's really well put, try not to use long quotes. Feel free to use short quotes for things like definitions. So if you really want to make sure you get the definition of mindfulness right, or like whatever constructs, using short quotes for definitions is really great. I even do that. If I've written a really good definition in the past, I will quote myself. I'll say, this was a great definition, just use this one again. And some of my colleagues do that too. So one of my advisors pretty much always quotes herself for a definition of purpose, which I think is a good thing to do. Using a short quote for a definition, it's really clear. You don't have to rewrite the definition in a new or flowery way or different way. Just use the definition that exists. Sorry, maybe a little too long on short quotes, but feel free to use short quotes. Long quotes, probably don't use them. Again, I want to see more of your own ideas, how you're putting ideas together from the previous research. Again, you're paraphrasing through your entire paper, and you're including in-text citations, but having a long chunk of quote is not as useful as me seeing your thoughts, your ideas, and how you're organizing your paper. So these are used for a quote that is 40 words or more. You'll make sure it's double-spaced. There's no quotation marks here. You would introduce it with something like this. Kinsella and colleagues, 2016, discussed that, colon, and then you have another indent. It's kind of like its own new paragraph, and you have that whole thing here. So I've got the author. This is Kinsella et al. In 2016, and this is the whole quote, and I do include the page number at the end still. So you introduce the long quote, who said this long quote, and then you do include the page number. So again, while this could be really useful, a long quote, you might be able to paraphrase better than using a long quote. And that's generally what I want to see in my students' papers. All right, so lists or seriation in your papers, that's pretty rare to see. You might see it in an actual research paper where they're kind of listing something that they used in a methods section, or listing the kinds of papers they read for doing a meta-analysis. So you can see them, but it's pretty rare, so I doubt any of my students will actually have any kind of lists in your papers. So with this, use numbers for chronological lists, use bullets for non-chronological lists. So here's some examples. You've got some definitions here for type of offenders: contact-only offenders, internet-only offenders, mixed contact offenders. So this is a whole quote as well as a list. Yeah, this is an example from one paper. You probably won't use them, but in case you need to. Also, you can check out the APA manual from the library. They might even have a digital copy that you can borrow. So that might be a really good way to look up a list or seriation, because this isn't a lot of detail, but it might happen. All right, so last we come to your reference list. This is essentially the last pages of your paper. You have references in bold and centered at the top. The whole reference list is double spaced. It's on its own page after the conclusion. So if your conclusion is only a couple sentences, or just goes on to a couple lines of a paper, or one page, it's still a whole other page until like its own brand new page for the reference list. It's alphabetical, so it starts with A, B, C, D, and you need to include the DOI or a stable URL. So you might see papers from, say, 2020 or before that don't have a DOI or a stable URL that is now required. And this really actually helps a lot, because when I look at a reference list, as long as for some reason the URL isn't broken, which can happen, it's a stable URL is supposed to not be broken, it's supposed to always exist, and a DOI is supposed to always exist, but I have found some that are broken. You click on it and it takes you directly to the page of that paper, like a PDF, an HTML version of the document, so you can download it directly. And I think it's super, super convenient as you're reading through a paper and you're like, oh, I want to read that reference, or that reference might have enough additional information that I want to get to. Scroll down to the reference list, see who wrote it, when it was, click on the DOI, you got it. And that is, I think, fantastic. So here's an example. You've got your page number in the top right still, references is at the top and bold, and then you jump into your A's for your references. These are called a hanging indent. You can highlight, like in a Word program, you can highlight this section. Oh, I can't actually highlight right now, this is a PDF. So you can highlight that section right there, and you can tell it that you want the formatting of a hanging indent. And then it will give you this, or you can manually just do a tab over. That's obviously longer, but if you've only got like 8 or 10 references, that's pretty easy. But because sometimes, depending on the word processor, the hanging indent setting is kind of buried between or within a couple different menus. So look up how to do a hanging indent in whatever word processor you're using, or just use the tab key to tab it over. So here you see an example of a DOI. Here, this should be a stable URL. You see they should all have a DOI or a stable URL. All right. So with this, you can use reference list generation software. So there's a lot of different software. I actually use Mendeley to generally make a first draft of a reference list, because that's where I store all my research articles, and it helps me as I'm going through. But make sure that it's done it correctly. There's other websites, other programs that can generate a reference list, but double check that they are correct. Make sure it's using APA version 7, not version 6, and you might have to go back even and find the DOI, because it's sometimes in a strange place on the actual PDF or journal article. It's there, it'll be there, you can find it. It might be after the references. Usually it's on like the first page of the document, so on the title page basically of the journal article. Generally that's where you'll find the DOI, but I've found it some strange places, like in the bottom corner of the PDF on the second page and following. So your reference manager might not pull out the DOI or the stable URL. So make sure you're double checking a couple different tools. Like Purdue OWL has a, like in brief, this is how to do a website citation. This is how to do a journal article citation. Well, that was strange. My recording hopefully is working. I'm nearly done, so if it really messed up, I will just redo this recording and I will be sad. So the Purdue OWL is a really good resource. They have a website where you can go to. I think the link is on the next page. I'll kind of navigate through it to find how to cite a website, how to cite a book, how to cite a newspaper article, how to cite a journal article. So libraries will also generally have the APA manual that has every single specific rule in it, but the Purdue OWL is kind of a briefer reference tool to use. So here is a good site showing reference list and text examples. And maybe my internet died. Oh, no, there it is. So here is a good example of things for APA Volume 7. So that's what this link is. So how many authors, gives you some examples. So here are the in-text citations. Purdue OWL is one that I use a lot to just double check that I'm doing things right. So here we've got the MLA style, and make sure you're clicking APA style. Make sure it's APA Volume 7. So here's APA Volume 7, and I want to go to the formatting and style guide. I want to know for reference list, how do I do an APA citation for a book? Well, it tells me right here. Here's an example of the things to include. Here's an example citation for it. That's how to cite a book in APA Volume 7. So perfect. It's easily searchable for the different rules for APA Volume 7. It also has things for like headings and whatnot, but mainly I use it for those other things. All right, so this is another general formatting page. So this is general formatting for your entire document. A lot of these things we've talked about already. Font, things to include on the title page. You can see I actually took this from APA or from Purdue OWL as your example. So go through there for more general formatting tips. I hit the primary ones in this presentation, and this is also an example student paper. So here's an example student paper that kind of points out different things. So there's comments on this is why you do this in the APA rule book. Here's an example page, and you've got an in-text citation, and it talks to you about that. So it's a really good thing to look at. This is essentially what your literature review paper should look like. And then down here you see what your reference list should look like. You've seen some of these pages in this slideshow. All right, and that was, I thought there was one more link that I had to share, but no, we've got the student paper, Purdue OWL, APA formatting, we talked about heading levels. So APA formatting, your first time might seem a little daunting. As you do it more and more, it's very easy to do. It's a very organized way to structure a paper. So start writing it, refer back to these resources, refer back to this video. There's a lot of good tools to help you do good APA Volume 7 formatting in your paper. So good luck, and I hope you do well on your papers.